this committee that puts all this together is made up of a volunteer group of sponsors and of CFOs. And I want to recognize them real quickly. Ron Herbert from Fast Signs, Kevin Kramer from DataSpan, Terry Hungel from Mavenir, and Larry King from Wamtech, along with Billy Bob Messer. I was going to say there's more. Omar, Omar, if you're not muted, Shukar, I think it is. I'm never good at saying your name. I apologize. And Melinda Lawrence from Worksoft. And then we also have sponsors. RHSB represented by Doug Jones, Foley by Peter Vogel Esquire, Comerica's represented by Charlie Fell, and of course Moss Adams with Carolyn Murray and Vance McCullough. So those are our sponsors. Always, when you have a chance to, you're looking for services in these areas, please consider inviting one of our sponsors to the table when you're looking for services. They do a lot of this work for you, and they're really, really invaluable for what we're doing. So throughout the session, we're going to do some polling questions. You'll see them pop up on your screen. You must answer 3 of the 4 polling questions in order to get CPE credit. It's basically there to show that you're alive and breathing and paying attention to the CPE. So the speakers should continue talking through the questions. Don't stop or pause, and please don't say end polling, because the speakers have the ability to cancel the polling, in which case we'll just have to restart again. So you can just exit out or whatever, but if you're looking for CPE, make sure you answer at least 3 of the 4. And I'll read the quick thing that I'm supposed to read, and then we're going to, I shall be done, and we'll hand it off to Mr. Vogel. So to be eligible for CPE, you must answer 3 of the 4 questions, and you must have a viewing time of 15 minutes, which is recorded. You'll receive your CPE notification email when the credits become available, about 7 to 10 days post this transaction. If we have technical difficulties or can't complete the program, we're not able to grant any CPE, so we apologize for that, but that hasn't happened to us yet. And in accordance with the standards of the National Registry of CPE sponsors, CPE credit will be granted based upon a 50-minute hour. I thought an hour had 60 minutes, but that's okay. So that's it for all the formalities. We will now officially start the program as I hand it over to Mr. Peter Vogel of counsel at Foley Lardner, LLP.
All right, thanks very much, Eric. I appreciate it. And it's a wonderful opportunity for us to discuss cybersecurity and the kinds of issues that we have today in trying to help the CFOs understand some of the reality of what we've got. On the panel with me today, we have Doug Jones at RHSB and Francis Tam from Moss Adams. So Francis, would you briefly tell the audience about your background so that we have a better understanding about where you're coming from?
Sure, thanks, Peter, for your introduction. So I'm a partner with Moss Adams. My main forte, my main skill set is cybersecurity. This is what I do on a daily basis. So in that arena where the team that works for me is a bunch of ex-network engineers, ex-network administrators. A lot of them have a lot of these, what we call military training in terms of hacking, safeguarding information, and that kind of stuff. So on a daily basis, a lot of our companies, a lot of our clients would ask us, hey, can you help us to determine the safeguards, the strength of the safeguards that we have in our environment, in our architecture, in protecting the information in our environment. So we do a lot of these, what we call network vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, right? And see what we can do to get in, and then even pivot out, listen to traffic, looking at firewall rules, looking at the devices outward facing, and see if we can pick up some patterns and get in and try to get through the first door, so to speak, and then pivot out and see what kind of information we get. So that's a big part of what we do on a daily basis. And then we also look at some of these frameworks that you may have to comply with. For example, payment card industry. If you touch credit card in your business, you are supposed to comply with PCI, payment card industry standards. How much you need to comply with depends on the nature of your business, depending on the volume of credit card transactions you deal with, and then depending on how, what kind of role do you play? Are you a merchant, endpoints, we call it, or are you a service providers, a middleman? So those are the things that we do look at and help our clients to determine how they need to safeguard the information. And then, of course, some of the more popular, the common ones that you may have heard of, you may have to deal with HIPAA, high trust in healthcare information. And then NIST 800-171, the newest thing is CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Measurement Act, that if you're dealing with anything to do with Department of Defense, right, the defense industry will require you to do certain assessment to determine the strength, determine how good you are before you're allowed to even submit your proposal. So those are all the different kind of frameworks. So all in all, we do look at all these different frameworks, the infrastructure, security, network security, firewall rules, Wi-Fi access points, all the ingress points, egress points about how information gets into your environment and gets out. So that's what I do on a daily basis.
And just for the sake of completing the thought, how long have you been doing this?
Almost 28 years.
Okay, so this is not something that just happened in the past year or two.
No, exactly. No, I mean, in the old days, back in the early 90s, things are a lot simpler, right? There's no internet. There's all mainframes. If you don't have a cable running from this computer to another computer, you don't have any connection. So it's much easier to determine the security. But nowadays, because of the explosion of internet, explosion of cloud, everybody wants to make it easy for everybody to access information. But then by the same token, you also make it easy for the bad guys halfway around the world to access your information. So it's totally different. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Thanks. Doug, would you take a few minutes and maybe explain to the audience about cyber insurance and what you do and how long you've been doing this? I know it's been a long time.
Yeah, it has been a long time. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time this afternoon and join us for this. I'm Doug Jones with RHSB. We're a commercial insurance brokerage doing commercial property casualty, employee benefits, and we also do personal insurance. I lead our technology practice group, and for the past 25 years have kind of focused on working with growth-oriented, mostly middle market technology companies, helping them with their risk management program, and then all of the insurance placement as well. I've actually been placing cyber insurance for over 20 years. Cyber insurance is continuing to evolve and to change quite a bit. It's about as sexy as insurance gets, which is a low bar.
Yeah, be careful what you say there, but okay.
Yeah, but it does change, and it's also something that every company now has this exposure. Everyone has cyber exposure, so we help companies just navigate the marketplace for that, help them with placing the coverage, and then assist in claim situations as well.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And as you pointed out, you've been doing this for 25 years, so this isn't something that just came about either.
Third generation insurance broker, majored in insurance risk management in college, and started when I was 13.
Wow.
So,
yeah. Well, how about that? Well, okay, so let me take a minute and explain my background and I guess my perspective on cybersecurity. I know this is the FDI group, so I will confess this. Every one of my family is a CPA, father, brother, uncle, cousins, and I am the black sheep because I am a lawyer and not a CPA. But I grew up as an accountant, so I certainly understand and appreciate the complexity that CFOs deal with day to day. And I am, as Eric pointed out, I am of counsel at Foley & Lardner. Foley & Lardner is an international law firm with about 1,100 lawyers. And for those of you who may remember, Gardner Wynn Sewell we combined with Foley & Lardner in 2018. But I have been involved in cyber for forever, it seems like. But in spite of the fact that I'm a lawyer, before I studied law, I had a career as a computer programmer, actually on IBM mainframes, as a matter of fact. and have a master's in computer science, worked on a PhD, hated it so much I went to law school, never intending to be a lawyer. I thought I'd do computer consulting. So I taught graduate and undergraduate computer courses all through law school, came back to Dallas after law school and did computer consulting for my father's CPA firm, as a matter of fact, Philip Vogel and Company, for those of you who may remember that name from the past. And so after a couple of years, my clients asked me to represent them as a lawyer. And I thought I'd just hang up my shingle. And I was a sole practitioner for 14 years. And I joined Gardier in 92 and now Foley. But in all my experience in practice, I have only ever represented buyers and sellers of information technology and internet services. Half of my practice is trial and event cases in 38 states. And the other half is transactional. But actually, I have a case going on right now. It's a Computer Fraud and Abuse Act claim going in the Western District of Pennsylvania for a competitor, a plumbing supply competitor who broke into our system and stole pricing information. So this is really happening, and this is a civil action, so it isn't criminal. So for the purposes of today, I think what we really want to do is try and tie things together and answer questions. So we certainly welcome questions, but probably will, depending on how they come up, we may wait and you could send us an email or we'll answer later. So in the meantime, maybe based on what you guys just said, I'm kind of intrigued to hear what you think. In our breakout room, one of the issues that came up was the fact that we are also vulnerable. And I pointed out about the number of cyber attacks. And I'm saying this in a bad way because the FBI doesn't call it cyber attacks, believe it or not. They call them cyber intrusions because from the time of the intrusion until the detection is 8 months. So Francis, what's going on during those 8 months? With what are the criminals doing in our computers that we don't know about?
That's a very good question because the data you're collecting, it's pretty much average of a lot of different cases. Not every single case is the same. So, I mean, just like myself, just like my team, when we break in, normally what we want to test is the alertness of the teams, right? We want to sit there and see, hey, have I been detected? And then are they doing anything to kind of kick me out, right? If not, then I can stand to get a lot more information. So a lot of times the bad guys, number one, they don't want to be detected. Number two, they want to sit there and wait patiently and see what kind of reactions they are seeing, right? People is trying to, wipe out some of the executable files right away. Then they know, right? And if not, then they would probably start to do something, maybe changing the CPU clock to hide the trails. So a lot of times, most of the cases, most of the hackers that we see, they're not going to do anything right away if they get in. They want to wait there and see. Why do they want to do that? Like I said, they want to see what kind of reactions people are doing, and also they want to sniff the traffic. They call it sniff the traffic. Why do they want to sniff the traffic? Because they don't know what they are looking at too, right? Just like going in blind, they want to sniff the traffic and see, well, is there like a honeypot? Is there like a treasury trove that they can get a lot of information, financial information, healthcare information, sensitive information, trade secrets. They want to make sure that they sniff all the traffic to see if there's, number one, certain servers are more important, passwords being passed around by maybe service accounts, by maybe individuals. Just listen for a while until they know, yeah, now I can figure out what the environment is in this world. There's like a big area, a segment where they host a lot of internal information I can get through. There's a segment where the R&D department is. They want to find out, and then eventually say, now is the right time. I'll go out and clean out the information. So that's what happened in that period. They don't want to do anything right away in most cases.
Right, and I think it was a point you made that I think is important for us to consider, and that is now in COVID-19 days, even worse, very, very few businesses have their own computers anymore. Everyone is either migrating or has already migrated to the cloud. And I know that when I help my clients with cloud contracts, that what I find is, Doug, that they haven't connected with the insurance to make sure they have the right coverage, depending on what kind of cyber protections are in place for the cloud. So I suspect that's something that comes up on your plate often.
Yeah, it does. And cyber insurance continues to evolve. It's the combination of third-party liability for someone making a demand against something you did or something you didn't do, as well as first-party coverage. And they are looking, what we're seeing a big shift with carriers now. They are spending much more time underwriting. For quite a while in the insurance market, was just a bunch of new entrants and capacity, and it was like land grab. Everyone's going out there writing as much as they can. Now we're really seeing carriers do a lot more underwriting on deals, and they're looking and asking questions to see, what they do have in place for like backups with cloud providers and so forth. What we're seeing right now is there's actually a separate supplemental application that's asking a lot more of this information about who you're using and how you're backing it up. And the underwriting process, it's really changed and shifted even in the last 6 months.
Yeah, and it's funny because a few years ago I met with one of the major cyber insurance companies, and they told me that before they issue a policy and they meet with a new potential insured, that they interview the board members, and the less the board members know, the higher the premium. And so there's been this big movement, which I'm sure everyone on on the program appreciates, is that boards of directors have to know about this, and the insurance industry has really been pushing the board members to get involved with cyber. Isn't that right?
Yeah, we're not seeing, interviewing board members a whole lot, but we are seeing definitely a shift in the last few months about asking much more specific questions. And they do want to see that commitment from the top, that there is commitment within the organization for this. And right now, what's happening is if you can't demonstrate some type of commitment or anything like that, then you are going to be penalized on the insurance.
All right. So we have our first polling question going on right now. We'll let that go for a little while longer. So in the meantime, one of the issues that strikes me is, and I'll say this in the worst way possible because I have a master's in computer science, but my experience has been that anybody that's any good with the computer is incapable of having a meaningful relation with another human. And I kind of mean that from the standpoint that they don't communicate very well. And so part of the problem that we have is we have to depend on IT professionals to explain to the C-level and to the board about what they need to do to get ready for cyber intrusions, and they're not really ready for it. Wouldn't you say that's been your experience, Francis?
Yeah, no, I think you're right, because a lot of times, even people like me, because of the changing in technology every day, every year, whatever I learned 5 years ago will become obsolete probably in 1 or 2 more years. You almost have to always try to keep up with the technology. Whatever we learn, maybe 3 years ago, nobody has even heard of cloud computing. Nobody has even heard of AWS. Hey, what are we doing using a cloud? Why are we using virtual machines, right? So a lot of times when I talk with, for example, the audit committee, I have to pretty much, I don't want to use the word, in a derogatory way, dumb it down, so to speak, and making sure they know that.
No, it didn't dumb it down. It's use English, the language that they speak, and not gizmo talk, right?
Exactly. No, IT jargons or whatever they understand. Right. Hey, where is my information? I say, hey, it's in the cloud. I say, well, what is a cloud? And you have to kind of explain to them, and so that they know where the risks are, and then how they can address some of the risk and protect it. So you're right. I mean, it's almost like a continuing education process, whether you are in the AC, whether you are in the trenches, in the operations room, in the IT guy, the information security people, all of us, right?
Right.
Because some of the latest breaches, like the SolarWinds one, I don't know if anybody has paid attention to it. Oh, yeah. The pack is getting smarter and smarter. They're not going to attack you directly. They're going to attack your third parties because they know you're going to rely on them. When they deploy the updates, boom, they're in. So
Well,
that's one,
yeah, I mean, just by way of example, when Target had that terrible attack, it came from the HVAC vendors used to their system. That's where that came from. And I agree with you. I think the criminals know that. But you made a comment that I think we need to kind of look at from a different angle. And maybe it's just I've been in the industry too long, but actually, cloud is not new. Google Google coined that term cloud, but it's been around since at least 1964 with Dartmouth time sharing. It was a remote computer, but back in the 60s, we got to the computers by the telephone line. So I think which has been the bigger difference, and you pointed this out, and I would like to get Doug's take on this as well, and that is the internet has just changed the entire world, and it is evolving at a tremendous speed. And what worked last week doesn't work next week. So Doug, I'm sure you've seen that in action day to day, right?
Yeah, we have, and we've also seen how the bad actors have evolved through that as well. Something Francis was saying earlier is right now they're much more patient and strategic, where before it was almost like shotgun approach, smash and grab type deal. Now they are being very patient and strategic. And it's what it's done on the insurance side is it's dramatically increased the severity of claims. A cyber extortion claims used to be $1,000, and now everything's 7, 8, 9 figures that we're seeing, and the severity has just increased so much with them being patient and, like Francis was saying, looking for those big tickets. And yeah, that's what we're seeing, and we're seeing it at an exponential pace too. It's just incredible the number of claims. Just give you an example, Chubb Insurance right now, they are paying anywhere from 1 to 3 7-figure claims on a weekly basis.
wow.
And that's just not sustainable.
No, and what goes along with that is the Department of Treasury is threatening to sanction companies that pay ransom if it's going to
actually, yeah,
it's going to terrorists.
Yeah.
So this
absolutely
is really a nutty circumstance, and I think part of what's been driving this, and I think you all have both made a reference to it, but I think it's something to consider, is the dark web has created an industry for these criminals. And like, for instance, I am sure, and Francis, I ask you to respond to this one, but I know that ransomware as a service is one of those options, so that, some 20-year-old kid in college can go on the dark web, get it, and make money. It's like a hobby kind of thing, right? I mean, that's what's going on.
Absolutely. No, I think you're right, because I won't admit it if you ask me in public, right? But somebody, not me, maybe, right? Actually, you can go in the dark web, and not me, somebody else would read these almost like classify X. You can call it hacker as a service thing,
Right.
and you can hire a PhD who knows TCP/IP inside out for what, 1 Bitcoin, 2 Bitcoins, and you give them a target. I want you to get me this, and boom. That's what they will do. 1 or 2 Bitcoins is only about what, 30, 40K, 60K max, but the return on investment could be millions. And that is available right now. I mean, I'm not going to suggest this, but it's pretty easy to find, right? Not me, somebody else will watch it and say, hey, well, this is interesting. You look at all the foreign exchange by the people, I don't know where they are. They are all hiding their identity, but people are offering hacking as a service.
Yeah,
It's
no,
amazing.
and I think you brought up an important point there with that example, and that
Mhm.
is, I don't want to change the subject too much about blockchain and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, but when we have unregulated monetary systems going on at the same time, it makes the world really complicated. As a matter of fact, this spring, I'm working with the Texas Blockchain Council, and we're trying to get the legislature to change the Uniform Commercial Code to help make it enforceable in the state of Texas. So I think that this is a huge deal. And Doug, I don't know if that's run into your equation on the insurance side yet, but if you have to pay the ransom and it's in Bitcoin, How do you do that? How do the insurance companies do that?
Well, ideally, you don't want to pay the ransom, and probably the biggest driver on that is the backups that you have. But that's part of the process, and going through the insurance claim is try to figure out what was taken, and are there backups that you can use, and then you determine, are we going to have to pay the ransom or not? And yeah, they'll have people that will negotiate with the bad actors, and at times they are paying this.
Well, I have a client that is in the business of paying ransom for businesses, and last year some criminal got hold of their CFO and comptroller's Office 365 account, and some criminals hijacked a ransomware payment. So it was sort of like, okay, now what do we do? And it was in Bitcoin. So, and it was on a weekend, so they couldn't get more Bitcoin because it was Sunday. I didn't understand that, but that was their story anyway. So I think this is much more complicated, but the Department of Homeland Security recommends that you don't pay the ransom because, number one, you don't know if the ransom, if you're going to get your data unencrypted, that's one. And then the other is whether or not you're not going to have a target on your back so the criminals know you paid a ransom, and you'll be attacked again in the future. And you did make a point, and I think this is important. I'll ask Francis to address this. The criminals are getting so smart that they're now putting malware in the backup, so the backups aren't any good. They're not.
First place they attack.
Yeah, they got that
Yep.
part. Yeah, right. Francis, how is that? How are you seeing that?
Yeah, so when you have a breach, when you if you suffer some kind of virus attack or ransomware attack, you never know. Whatever backups you have, maybe a month ago, maybe half a year ago, because you don't know when the attack or the breach happened. So you might have already backed up the virus, the Trojan horse, whatever they already implanted. So that's why I say, with the patience that these guys have, unlike us, if you pay me to do a hacking attempt, you pay me a set fee, I only have a certain window to get it done. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I'm done. I have to leave. But the bad guys have no rules, no budget, no timing. So when you have a breach, the way I kind of say this kind of in a joking way, when you have a breach, it's almost like the movie Aliens. You have nuked the whole planet. You have to nuke the whole planet because you don't know. You have to start from scratch and reinstall everything because you don't know if you have backed up all the bad viruses already. You don't know what kind of executables you have already got from the bad guys. That's the only way you know for sure. So it's not a cheap exercise to recover from a breach. You have to do all these little things to make sure that pre-plan. Even if you have a breach, you want to contain it. So that's a big thing in our world too.
Right.
Yeah, I was talking to an insurance carrier recently that said their biggest losses right now are data restoration losses.
Right.
And the demands on the extortion are just so high. So a lot of those aren't being paid, and instead they're paying for the data restoration. It's you nuke everything and then you have to build it back up, and that's where the insurance is coming into play instead of the extortion, because the demands are so high.
Yeah. But just to kind of focus in on the title of our program today, just to make sure we're clear on this, navigating threats in the work from home environment from the CFO seat. Let's kind of focus on that for a minute. We are all, well, let me put it like this. I have not been in my office in 10 months. I think many of the people in this program are working remotely. And so, Francis, how do you see that as the specific, that is, the COVID-19 impact on everyone on the call that today is sort of like a year ago, nobody would have ever envisioned where we are, right?
Right. So maybe I can talk about from the individuals who work from home, right? So the way I think in our break room, I kind of said this before, COVID-19 is a catalyst. It forces a lot of us to think about how we do business. It's almost like a way that forces us to do digital transformation. A lot of things that we didn't do before, now we have to do it, right? For us to work from home, maybe before we only work 1 day from home, maybe 2 days in a week from home. Now we're working 5 days from home. have you looked at your latest protocol that you're using for your Wi-Fi access point? Do you know that if you're using WEP, I can crack it in 5 minutes using my tool? That's not the case maybe 5 years ago. If you're using WPA, the protocol, and not WPA 3 or 2, I can
Hey,
crack it in 25 minutes.
Francis, you want to explain in plain English what you're talking about?
Sorry. So when you set up an Wi-Fi access point, right? Oops.
Yeah,
When
okay,
you set
another
up a
polling question too.
right, when you set up a Wi-Fi access point when you're using Wi-Fi at home, right, using your router and whatnot, there's a protocol because you want to set a password to it. So what I was talking about, there are many protocols, many ways you can set up that security. If you set it up, there's like a minimum way. It's called WEP. That's the weakest one you can find.
What does that mean, WEP?
WEP is just I can't even remember what it stands for, but it's if you look it up, it's a protocol, and you do configure your firewall, your
Oh,
Wi-Fi
okay.
access point. It will ask you, hey, do you want to set it up this way? It's basically the way they encrypt the password, how
Right.
complex it is, right? But if you use the simplest way, like I said, the tools, you can probably look it up in YouTube. Unfortunately, you can look up everything in YouTube and find a tool that can crack it in 5 minutes. So you want to use, oh my God, you know what? I want to use WPA, another protocol that is more complicated. The encryption key, it's longer. It will take a lot longer to decrypt, but still, that's not 100% bulletproof because it will just take maybe another 20 minutes to crack it. So those are the things you have to kind of consider when you work from home as individuals. How can you protect yourself, your Wi-Fi access points, and then does your computer have, for example, application level firewall, database firewalls, all these things, depending on maybe your risk appetite. What do you think what kind of information you have at home? If you're running a local area network at home, do you want to do certain things to share passwords? Do you want to segment certain things? That's all you want to consider at home, right? And if you're running a company, hey, you may have certain data that you want your employees to share. Where are you going to store that information? Are you going to store it in a cloud, in a network NAS device, network access storage device at maybe an office? How are you going to make it available to your folks? Is it going to be using multiple factor authentication, right? Are you just going to be using some remote desktop procedures, a password and an ID? That's it, right? It's pretty weak. So you can see, there are different rigors about how you want to protect that information.
Right. And so, Doug, what have you been seeing in terms of COVID-19 claims that have been made in the past year that may be attributable to the work from home vulnerabilities that Francis was just addressing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was visiting with some insurance carriers recently, and they said that managing remote desktop protocol is actually one of the leading drivers of ransomware claims. And this is one of the things that the insurance carriers are really starting to drill down on, and they're asking more about. Multi-factor authentication is a big thing. And then, what are your remote desktop protocols? How are you managing that? How secure is that? And there's one insurance carrier that said just by running scans, they were able to reduce claims by 65%.
Yeah.
And so this is an area of vulnerability that is high on the top of the list for insurance carriers where they are underwriting, because they see this vulnerability has just created a huge wave of ransomware claims. And ransomware claims for insurance, that impacts so many different parts of a cyber policy, because that's also going to be triggering forensics. It can be PR, crisis communication, legal expenses, data restoration. There's so many areas of a cyber policy that are impacted by a ransomware claim. And this vulnerability has just really created a huge increase in claims. And then the severity of claims has increased significantly. So we have absolutely seen a change in the past, say, even 6 months. and it's not slowing down at all.
Well, and I think something that comes into play here, and I've helped clients with this particular issue, is having an incident response plan so that you know what to do when you find out that there's been an attack, and whether or not you ever test that tabletop testing. And so, Francis, I'm sure in your day-to-day activities, that's something that's very important to you, isn't it?
Yeah, so when you're talking about, incident response plan, it's part of the overall BCP, business continuity planning. In many of my clients, a lot of them are in FI, financial institution. That's almost like basic. They must do it, right? Whether it's a cyber attack or fire, for example. So hopefully everybody has a good plan that they practice, that they exercise to make sure when you get hit by a virus, when you get hit by ransomware, you know where to go. Do you need to kind of cut off this environment and then put up another instance of the current environment? So, do something at least to practice it, at least to exercise it, so that you know that plan works. That is a very, very good point and very important.
Well, and one of the things I've always included in the tabletop testing that I've been involved in over the years is when you actually do it, that you kind of invite some critical person like the CFO to be off on vacation the week you're doing it. Because who steps in behind the CFO? Who's there, really? And that's part of why you need to be doing that testing. And so I think that is an important thing to consider. One of the things that I also think is important that kind of fits into this as well, and that is, Doug, probably you would be the right person to address this, and that is, after there's been an incident and there's an investigation, as you pointed out earlier, one of the things that I have found is that whether or not there was an incident response plan, whether it was invoked, who did what, is part of the investigation, and the cyber insurance covers that investigation usually, right?
Yes, that's correct. And that's one thing you need to be careful of is in the event of a cyber incident, you do have coverage for this, but carriers don't just give a blank check or reimburse you for anything you did. They want to be involved in the process, and they've got relationships with a lot of firms that do this, and they've negotiated rates and so forth. So you need to be sure that you bring in the insurance carrier early in the process so that they know about it, and then they can leverage their relationships, people that they have worked discounts with, to go ahead and do this. Where people would make a mistake a lot of times is they spend a lot of time and money with this before they even notify the insurance carrier. And then the insurance carrier is like, well, the clock doesn't even start ticking until we know about it. So all that expense you incurred is not going to be covered.
Right.
But they do have a lot of resources. And that's a trend that we're seeing is more insurance carriers and brokers are trying to provide more resources for that. And even stuff with vulnerability scans and security assessments and so forth.
Well, I have for many years done those forensic investigations and helped clients. And one of the things that I think helps is that if a lawyer hires the forensic investigator, then that is confidential work product. And so oftentimes, and the insurance companies know that as well, so they make sure there's a lawyer involved. And as you pointed out, the insurance companies have relationships with many law firms to make sure that they have lawyers involved to protect that. And, having said that, one of the comments you made earlier, Francis, about problems is with credit card, payment card industry data security standards, PCI. And I think that is something that people don't realize until they had a problem. I had a client a few years ago that had a PCI intrusion, and it took 7 months from the time we detected it to figure out what happened. So and I'm sure based on your experience with PCI, you probably had similar experiences.
Oh, many of them. It's I don't know. It's just one of those things that you can always have a flaw. You can always have a weakness in your environment. It depends on how many layers you're going to put in, what kind of monitoring, what kind of detective controls you're going to put in. The key is just like a car, right? If you have no alarm, if you have no lock in your car, you tend to attract more thieves. But if you have an alarm, you have a wheel lock, if you have all kind of bells and whistles, it tends to deter the thieves more. So just like a environment, if you have a lot of card data, if your CDE, your card holder data environment, it's full of good information, but if you don't put in all these safeguards, and people can see it very quickly, right? If you are hooked up to the internet, it's inevitable you're going to be pinged, you're going to be scanned. But people can see right away when they scan you. There's a lot of bells and whistles. They're hiding a lot of things. I cannot get anywhere, and even if I can get in, boom, all kind of alarms will go off. They will go away because most of the bad guys, the number one thing they're so afraid of is being detected, right?
Yeah.
And if they are detected, then they lost their anonymous identity. They want to stay low, and then if you are detecting them, they tend to move on quicker than you would think.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yep.
Well, yeah, and someone asked a question, and I think this is a really good question. It's, are the attacks on larger companies, or are you seeing more on smaller companies that cannot defend themselves? Warren Raptor asked that question, and I personally have been observing this for years, and I think the attacks are going to smaller companies because they are less prepared, and the ransomware are directed at smaller companies that really can't afford the luxury of maybe even having insurance. But they have to do something, right, Doug? I mean, you're shaking your head, so I know you agree with that.
So some recent stats I saw were like 81, 82% of all attacks are for companies under 1,000 employees.
Right.
So
it's unfortunate, but that's where we are because they're more vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. And even some of these small companies, they're able to get some pretty nice paydays on it. I've got one client that's not real large, and this was kind of a social engineering where they actually accessed the CEO's email through someone with administrative rights, and patiently, strategically waiting for that. And then they got a new client, and it was over $600,000 invoice. And they said, posed as the CEO said, here's the invoice, and then here's our bank that's adjacent to our office building. It's the branch right there. And the bad actor actually opened up an account at the branch right next to their office building. And then they had another transaction for over 400,000.
Right.
So, it's 1.1 million, and this is a company that does less than 20 million in revenue. So
it's and that's referred to as spear phishing or business email compromise. And there have been billions and billions of dollars have been stolen with that. The FBI's reported over the years. And I'll tell you, I had a client here in the Metroplex, as a matter of fact, and their comptroller's Office 365 account was compromised. And the criminals sent a capital call to investors, and one of their investors paid, and nobody found out about it until it was out of the bank. And we didn't have insurance to cover that, and our investor didn't either. So it's a pretty scary proposition when that happens. But they weren't a huge company either, but yet they were vulnerable. And you know what that reminds me of is something that is a topic that I think is probably important as well, is there are an awful lot of companies that do not have their own technology employees. They use something called a managed service provider. That's the common term to describe. The old term used to be outsourcing, and now it's called managed service provider. I've negotiated many of those deals, and what I find them to be is so incomplete and not detailed. They say they're providing like availability 24/7, 365, and they put a check mark next to it. That's the total explanation. And so, Francis, I don't know what you've run into with those managed service provider agreements, but if I had to go to court and fight about it, I don't think I would be very happy at the results. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's hit and miss. I mean, I deal with a lot of these MSSP, managed service provider, or managed security service provider, they call it. A lot of them are very good, some of them not so good, because like I said, it depends on how diligent these guys are. So in our world, I think Doug, you mentioned earlier, hey, scanning is a big part of it. Guess what? When we do our scan, a lot of these guys are very sloppy. They don't do patching the way they should. Patching is a big part of strengthening your environment. And we found out they submit so many critical patches,
Yeah.
whether it's in a firewall, whether it's an operating system, that they're supposed to patch every out a week, let's say. But there's so many critical patches they miss, maybe 3 months old, maybe 4 months old. Why? They were trying to test if they are compatible with the current environment. That may be the explanation, right? So my experience is very, very varied. I guess it's not like every one of them is good. It depends on
Yeah.
how many people they have, the knowledge base they have, but it varies.
No, it's funny because the example I gave when I did a deep dive with my client after we found out about that money being transferred and losing it, I talked to the comptroller and I said, who is the person at the MSP that you work with on a day-to-day basis? And she named him. And I said, and is he in Richardson with everybody else? Oh, no, he's in Bulgaria. And I said, wait a minute, red flag. What do you mean he's in Bulgaria? Well, it turns out, she said, his mother got very sick, and so he went back to Bulgaria to help her out. Well, it turns out, actually, he lost his visa and was thrown out of the country, is what we found out later. So how can you prepare insurance to protect something like that, Doug?
Yeah, well, you want to be sure that your coverage is going to respond and not have like some third party. You need to be sure that you've got really good coverage and you're not relying upon the third party, because you could have some of these outsourced people saying, oh, we've got stuff to cover you for this. And that is part of the underwriting process. They're going to want to know, how are you dealing with anyone that helps manage this and so forth. But you can't rely upon their coverage or any warranties and representations that you make. You need to really be sure that you've got something that's going to back you up in the event that there's no indemnification available for you to go after the person that's providing services and failed to do so.
Well, and someone asked a question that is a topic that I spend a lot of time on, and that is cybersecurity in M&A transactions. What do we do? What responsibility do we have? I have, as a lawyer, ask the buyer or the seller to provide proof of what they're doing in cybersecurity. And Francis, we talked about this the other day, but the reality is, when we're going through this M&A process, there are an awful lot of lawyers, and I suspect CFOs as well, that don't know how to look at a AICPA SOC 2 Type 2 report. I just had a transaction last month, as a matter of fact, and I had two SOC 2 Type 2 reports. One was 337 pages, and the other was 304 pages by one of the big international accounting firms. But I think we have a duty. The CFO has a duty to connect with that, and I know you have a whole team of people that do that in your group, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I have one of my partners here, Mark Hurst. He's in Dallas, right? Hi, Mark. That's what we do on a daily basis, building SOC 2, Type 2, Type 1 reports all the time. So you're right. When we do, for example, due diligence on third parties, short of sending your team to do your own tests, that's all you have to report. So you have to really kind of vet that report carefully, because if you have a report, it doesn't mean that they're good. Maybe in the old days, you check the box, oh, you got a report, I'm done. That would be kind of like old fashioned, no, that's not good enough anymore. You really have to dive deep into the report and see what kind of controls, what kind of tests being performed, what kind of opinion, what kind of findings, what kind of disclaimer they have in the report. All of those are very important.
Yeah, and just for the sake of the audience, I'm not sure that everyone on realizes the SOC 2 tests from the AICPA. There's also a Type 1, And the type 1 is it just happens whenever you do the audit. The type 2 is it's done annually. And so sometimes it makes a difference when you want to say, I want to make sure you're doing a type 2. That's very important. And I don't know, Doug, is that something that comes up, these SOC reports, is that something that comes up on your plate?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that you see on a lot of the insurance applications and so forth. And the carriers are looking for that.
Well, and I said, I'm talking about AICPA, but there's also international ISO standards, 27001, among others. And then something else, Francis, you mentioned this at the beginning about all these federal standards between HIPAA and I'm sorry, and HITRUST, yeah. But I was going to say, in addition to that, of course, that depends on being in medical, but there are all these organizations that have to comply with federal laws. And I think that there's a burden on the CFO to be familiar with all these NIST standards, National Institute Standards for Technology, that have been around for a very long time. And I just read recently that one of the standards that are trying to promote to not just be for the government, to be for everybody. So I think we're going to see some of that coming, particularly because of cyber. Has that been your experience, Francis?
Oh, there's so many standards, so many regulations, depending on where you are, depending on which industry you're in. I mean, I cannot name them all. I cannot follow all of them, right? If you operate in the European Union, EU, GDPR, right? Everybody has heard of it. If you operate in where I am right now, California, you have to comply with CCPA, right? And then each state, I have a whole list. I don't think it's up to date anymore. Each state has their own privacy law. In California, we have Senate Bill SB 1342, AB Assembly Bill 1 or 12 or something like that. This is, all of them has to do with privacy. If you have a breach, what you need to do, disclosure, red flag act, you name it, we have it. In Germany, they have a C5. I think Mark, you know. So I can't even tell you what the C5 is in our privacy law. Switzerland just rolled out another one last week. Something to do, it's almost like a different variation of GDPR. So all of them, the country, the jurisdiction you're in, everybody now has their own kind of way and form of privacy and cybersecurity act.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and that we didn't mean to omit it completely, but the GDPR has had a significant impact. But even that law that went into effect 3 years ago now, that actually was based on the 1995 data directive, where citizens of the EU have right to get their data, change it if they want, or have it deleted with that the right to be forgotten. But it wasn't enforced. So that's what GDPR is doing now. I think California is moving that same way. The Texas legislature is going to consider a similar law this spring. So the privacy issue is important, but it's part of the M&A process. And I think coming back around in looking at how do we go about making sure that it's covered properly. So, and we just have a few minutes left, less than 5. So I guess in conclusion, I'd like to ask to see, Doug, if you have any final comments to make to the audience, and then I'll ask Francis.
Sure, thanks. I would tell everyone that the cyber market is changing dramatically. As we mentioned, kind of the work from home has increased the ransomware claims, and the expediency and severity of these claims has really changed the cyber insurance market. So what I'd say for CFOs is be prepared. You are going to be seeing rate increases, and you are going to have more information to fill out on the applications. There's a lot of separate information, supplemental information that they'll need, and you will be penalized if you don't have the multi-factor, if you're not backing up off-site, if you're not doing employee training, if you don't have good remote desktop protocol. Those are really key issues that are focused more than ever before in the cyber market. So, be prepared for that.
Francis, do you have any final thoughts to share with the audience today?
Sure. So I think for my world, I play with in a field that there are no rules. I always say there are no rules. Forget about all these laws and regulations. Nobody can tell me this is the only way that as long as you address all these, you're good to go. No, everything is changing on a daily basis. The vulnerability we're facing when we do a scan, whatever is critical maybe last week will become not critical. Something that was not very critical a month ago will become very critical in a month because somebody found a way to get around it. So the main thing is you have to really, if you're in charge of a company or in charge of something very sensitive information wise, you have to keep very good IT hygiene. That's the way I see it. You
Right.
have to make sure that you have
Yeah.
different layers of defense, do something, maybe, a scan, and then put up as many bells and whistles and alarms you can afford. Like I said, the hackers, bad guys, I'm an ethical hacker. The unethical ones, they're afraid being detected. Once they see that you block them, they would tend to, shy away and move away. But if you, let them go in and stay there, they're gonna go laterally to everywhere and take your information. So keep stay alert and stay vigilant about your defense, your safeguards. Whatever you feel comfortable right now, keep in mind it will become obsolete, it will become unsafe in probably in a few months. So you have to keep it up every so often.
Well, thank you both for your great thoughts today about cybersecurity and navigating the threats work from home in today's world. And let me encourage the audience, if y'all would like to send us questions, we'll be happy to send back email comments. I've kind of run out of time to get through all those questions. And I see we've really run out of time. So Eric, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome, thank you. Hey, Peter, Doug, Francis, great panel. Thank you so much. Really informative. It's amazing what's going on out there in the world today. We appreciate your help with this. And, like he said, if anyone needs their contact information or anything, reach out to me or anyone else in the committee, and we'll definitely get you hooked up. Also, remember that these meetings are open up to anyone, whether they're a FEI member or not, as long as they're in the industry and in finance. They are welcome to join. So please publicize these meetings. And if anyone wants to get more involved in the steering committee or sponsorship, just reach out to me and I'll help you all do that. So thank you very much. Great panel. And we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.